Hello and welcome to And Cory. This episode is part one of a two-part interview with Chef Adam Kreisel, owner of Kaya Cucina Catering and Consulting, recipient of a Snail Award from Slow Food Utah, board member of Three Squares, which is a non-profit helping to fight hunger through food access and education. They're not just giving people fish, they're showing them how to catch them, clean them, and cook them. So for your listening pleasure, here is Chef Adam Kreisel and Cory. Welcome. Today we're here with Chef Adam Kreisel.
Hello.
Owner of Kaya Cucina Catering and Consulting. How's it going, Adam?
It's going just fabulously.
Awesome.
Thank you,
How's
Cory.
Kaya Cucina?
Kaya Cucina is pretty solid.
Yeah.
It's the business has, I would say, hit a plateau over the last several years, but it has not dipped at all, and it's still solid. And I have other projects that are taking my focus,
Heck
so
yeah.
that's okay.
Before we get into those projects,
Yes.
do you mind if we take a little time travel trip and learn more about you? So, basically, where were you born?
I was born in Massachusetts, at Beth Israel Hospital.
Okay. Sounds nice.
I lived in Lexington, Massachusetts, until I think I was 2 when we moved to Sudbury, and then I was in Sudbury. I grew up in Sudbury, which is a town about 20 minutes directly west of Boston.
Okay, so Boston's the big metropolis by Sudbury. I know nothing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I tell people I grew up in Boston. I mean, I really technically grew up in the burbs, but it's the burbs are 20 minutes away, and Sudbury's an old farming town. It's actually the largest town in landmass in Massachusetts. It touches 10 other towns.
Really?
Yeah, it's very odd.
I've never heard of it. But I've never.
Babe Ruth's summer home was there.
Okay.
Down the street from my house, as it turned out.
That's pretty cool.
Kind of funny.
What is your earliest memory?
My earliest memory. Man. That's a great question. I would say amongst my earliest memories are being up in Vermont in the winter. My dad grew up in Philadelphia. He has a brother, my Uncle Peter, who's 6 years older than he is. And when they left to go to school and then graduate school, they eventually settled, my Uncle Peter in Burlington, Vermont, and my dad in Boston, respectively. When I was 1, they built a house, ostensibly a cabin, but a house, in Starksboro, Vermont, which is on the backside of Mount Stark. The opposite side of it is where Mad River Glen and Sugarbush and what is now Sugarbush North, what used to be Glen Ellen ski area, are. Kind of old school Vermonter style. I mean, really hardcore, what you think of as mountain town Vermont. But some of my earliest memories are of going up there when I was a kid, a very young kid, going up there at different times during the year, and it's really, being up there is really what turned me into a country mouse. I mean, that's what made me want to move out west after I graduated from college, because running around in the hills and picking blueberries and smelling cow pies and being near Dorothy Orvis's farm, that was cool. Yeah, those are colorful memories for sure.
That sounds pretty nice. Who was the most influential person to you as a child?
Another good question. My grandpa Hank was amongst them. My dad's dad, just because he was a great storyteller.
Yeah.
And my dad is an amazing orator. He's a great speaker, and he definitely gets that from his dad, and I get that from my dad. I would say the other sort of major influences were my two uncle. I have two Uncle Peters. I have an Uncle Peter that's my dad's brother, and I have an Uncle Peter that's my mom's brother. And they're both very funny. They're both very funny in very different ways. And my Uncle Peter, my mom's brother Peter, is 7 years younger than my mom, and he's been an executive producer for NPR in DC for the last 40 years roughly.
Yeah.
And the guy has been everywhere. I mean, he's climbed Mount Fuji and Mount Kenya and Mount Kilimanjaro. He's climbed Everest. He's been held captive on the top of a mountain when the Allende regime was toppled in Chile. I mean, he's been in Mogadishu and Somalia, and he's been in every war-torn country on the planet. He's interviewed the Dalai Lama in exile. The guys. So some of the things that really kind of gave me a zest for life when I was a kid were seeing his slides and his stories and hearing these interviews that he did, interviewing Muhammad Ali and stuff like that. Yeah, crazy stuff.
Huh. That's pretty fascinating. So did your two Peters, did they get along?
Absolutely. Excuse me. Yeah, they got along. They got along well. My mom's side and my dad's side of the family, respectively, did not have a whole lot of interaction. I mean, they did when I was younger, and then my parents split, and that kind of ended. But yeah, funny that my two Uncle Peters were both complete nut jobs, like total goofballs.
That's cool, though. How do you think your parents would describe you as a child?
Ooh, as a child. Very cute, very smart.
Of course.
Kind of nerdy. I mean, I was small, butt cut, haircut, bifocals.
Yeah.
Headgear when I got into high
Really?
school. Oh, it was brutal, man. I was. There was a period there, a couple of years in sort of like middle school and into high school. I mean, every possible reason you could have to tease a kid, I exhibited all simultaneously.
That's well, if you're going to be good at something, anything worth doing.
I've always been kind of a ham, kind of a goofball. So that's probably how they describe me.
That's cool, though. That's fun to have around. Did you have any pets as a child?
First pet, I had a handful of fish. They all leaped out of the tank to their death. Yeah, every fish I ever had committed suicide. So which really soured me on the potential idea of having a pet. But we got a dog for the first time when I was 11, and I've never not had a dog since.
Describe that. Describe getting your first dog. Do you remember that? But when you first met?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't actually remember why my parents fixated on English Cocker Spaniels, but they did. And we got an English Cocker who was a blue roan, which is a misnomer because they're obviously not blue, but they have this kind of grayish slate color in part of them. So Webby was black and white and this gray, which is the hallmark of being a blue roan. And he was super, super cute. I can't. They might have had a friend who had one, and they met this woman that was the breeder, and so she bred these English Cockers, and we got one. And we named him Webster. He was a black dog in a white family. I kid you not. That was they let my sister and I name him, and that's where we came up from. It was Emmanuel Lewis, man.
Classic. That's awesome. So in the winters, you spent time in Vermont.
In the winters, I spent some time in Vermont. Yep.
What'd you do as a kid in the summertime?
When I was a real young kid, I mean, we'd go to ponds and mess around and just play outside. And I'd be going. Back in the day when there were no predators out there. Correct. You could go. I'd leave the house at 9 o'clock in the morning and come back at 9 o'clock at night. My mom didn't know where the hell I was. I was out playing basketball or running in the woods or playing kick the can or whatever. Right. When I got a little bit older, from the time I was 8 until I was 16, I went to overnight camp up in Maine for at least a month every summer at a camp that was run by a guy that happened to live in Sudbury, so there were a lot of kids from my town and the neighboring towns that all went to this overnight camp.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great.
Sounds like you had a pretty, like, picturesque childhood almost. I mean, it's easy to say that from the outside.
It was pretty solid. I mean, I grew up well. I mean, I didn't want for anything. My parents both worked, and they worked hard, but they were both very successful and very well educated, and they provided well for my sister and I. And even when I got to, my dad told me when I started high school, when I was 14, he said, "Listen, I've set aside money for you to go to college. Know that if that's something that you want to do, and you don't have to do it, but if it's something you want to do, the act of being able to cover the cost of your tuition is not an impediment to you going where you want to go." And he said, you do with that information what you choose, and kind of left it at that.
Yeah, that's great.
Of course, at that point, then I'm sure he knew that the pressure that I would inflict on myself would far outweigh any pressure that he could have ever put on me to do well in school. So.
Did you have any nicknames as a kid?
Yeah. Well, my last name is Kreisel, and Kreis was always just the abbreviated version, not Christ.
No, yeah.
But Kreis was always one of them. There was one. I took French when I was a kid. When I was in middle school, you had to choose a language. You had to pick French or Spanish to take as a language. Of course, I picked French, the stupidest language I could ever choose. I mean, from a utilitarian standpoint, the most useless language I could ever think of. Although, to be fair, now that I'm in the culinary world,
right,
there is some use to my French background, but we used to play wiffle ball in my backyard. We had a stadium. There was a huge part of my backyard that adjoined my neighbor's backyard, and the Sugarmans lived next to us. And Jeff Sugarman and I and a whole host of dudes that I grew up with, we all used to play home run derby and wiffle ball and football back there, and we used to call it Suge Christ Stadium. We would play wiffle ball. And I would, for whatever reason, I was learning French numbers, and instead of saying 1, 2, 3 or whatever, I would say un, deux, trois, and that string of words, un, deux, trois, in various forms, crunched together verbally, also became a nickname. Again, horrible.
Fantastic. That's funny.
Bifocals, headgear, and crappy French.
Un, deux, trois.
Awesome amalgam.
What adjectives would you use to describe your childhood?
To describe my childhood?
Mm-hmm.
Colorful. Educational.
20 more.
Happy.
Yeah.
Friend rich.
That's important, especially as a child.
Experience rich.
That's pretty great.
Experiential, just generally speaking. Yeah.
What were you most afraid of as a child?
I was definitely afraid of like creeper boogeymen outside. We had this big bow window in our living room, and you could and we lived in this really heavily wooded area, and so you could see out into the backyard, but you couldn't see anything in the backyard. And I was always convinced that something was going to come firing up to that window and leap through it. Beyond that, not much. I was kind of a little bit afraid of being a failure.
Yeah. That's definitely probably pretty natural.
Yeah, and I was always comfortable in my own skin, but not a very outwardly confident person. So I was always kind of...
Do you think the headgear and bifocals contributed to that at all?
You think?
I could see how...
Suffice it to say, when I left high school, I basically completely reinvented myself.
Yeah. Well,
Physically,
me too.
and mentally, it was a sea change.
Yeah. Well, that's good to do, though.
It is, and I was lucky enough that I turned from a midget into a big dude.
Yeah. But were you pretty short as a kid?
All at once? I was a tiny little nothing.
Yeah.
I was between the end of my junior year in high school and the middle of my freshman year in college, so roughly a year and a half, I grew 8 inches and gained 65 pounds.
Wow.
And my dad had the same thing. It was a late growth spurt and then became big. And my friends all knew it would happen because my dad coached CYO basketball, and they were like, "Oh, Kreisel's going to get big someday. We better beat him up now while we have the chance." But it all of the confidence that I lacked, in part because of my stature when I was younger, I gained the confidence enough to proffer my opinions after that, especially when I got to college.
So after your growth spurt, was there a period of time where maybe you overcompensated a little bit for that, and did you ever dig into I'm a big guy now, that kind of mentality?
No, I never. I mean, if you mean from an egotistical standpoint,
that's what I mean.
No, because I still had the mentality of being a little dude, and I never wanted to. I mean, I never felt the need to be a bully. I never had that. Desire. It wasn't like I wanted to get anybody back for kicking my ass when I was a kid, but I definitely carried myself with a much greater air of confidence after that point. It also was the case. I played sports all growing up, and I played 3 sports in high school. I was a very middling athlete. I mean, I played 3 varsity sports, but I was, relatively crappy at all 3 of them. And I got to college, and I picked up a sport that I had never known before, which was rowing.
Oh, really?
Rowing Olympic-style crew.
Okay, yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was working out literally 6 or 7 hours a day. We had practices at 5:30 in the morning and 4:30 every afternoon. And I was growing, and I was at college, and I was eating 10,000 calories a day. And I all of a sudden, I was jacked.
Yeah.
And I came home. Jim McCloskey told everybody that I was on roids, just for the sake of doing it. But it probably, to be fair, it probably looked like I had gotten that way, because all of a sudden I came home at winter break, freshman year of college, and I was like a different human, in every possible way.
Yeah. That must be nice, see, because when I came back from college and visited, people was like, "Cory, you're getting fat now." You need to chill the fuck out on the beer. But
I drank my share for sure, but I started drinking really young. When you grow up in Boston, many places, but in Boston, it's like a religion to drink.
Yeah, it's
we started making fake IDs when I was 13 years old. So it had lost its novelty in the strictest sense when I got to college, but my tolerance was through the roof.
Yeah.
So I got there freshman year, and I could put down 20 beers and still be relatively cool. Yeah. And people were like, "Wow,
look at this guy." Where did your father work, if that's okay?
Oh, yeah. My dad was a stock analyst and portfolio manager.
Okay.
So he worked for a company called Keystone. I guess at first he worked for Barings, which is an English investment firm, a British investment firm, and then they bought Keystone, and he worked for Keystone for a number of years, and then ultimately he worked for Putnam Management, which is one of the largest money management firms in the country. So he worked at Putnam for I want to say 14 or 15 years, 16 years maybe, and he ran with another guy, Dave King. They ran 2 of the biggest mutual funds in the country. But he was always a buy side guy, not a sell side guy. So he was never a broker. He was always a manager. So he was always really about slow, methodical, really diligent evaluations and understanding of the meat and bones of a company. Yeah. He always figured he would meet the upper management, and regardless of what product they had or what their price to earnings ratio was, if he felt good about the management of the company, they would invest in it for the funds. And it's a very pragmatic approach. If you know my dad, then you know that fits right in line with who he is and how he is.
Yeah.
And that's very much how I am too. I mean, I'm maybe a little bit more fly by the seat of my pants, but I've had the opportunity to be too. So.
Right. Yeah. What is your strongest image of your father?
My strongest image of my dad is probably speaking to my class, actually. He came in when I was in 6th grade, when I was in Walker Walsh, and we had team teachers when we were in middle school. And he came in and he talked about, we were starting to learn about economics and money and whatnot. And he came in and he talked about it, and he basically broke up the class, and we formed little companies, and we went through this exercise. But that's actually that funny that I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question. I haven't really ever thought about it. I don't know if I've thought about that particular little vignette until you just asked me. But but that's probably one of my strongest memories, because I remember not only was it cool to have him in speaking to the class, but I remember all my friends being having all of a sudden sort of this newfound respect for my dad because of what he did, and sort of how he spoke and how he carried himself. And where I grew up was a very close-knit town. I mean, it's a relatively big town, but a relatively small number of people for the actual physical size of the town. And it's a New England community in the traditional sense, and it's a really, really, intense, really excellent school system, and really hardcore sports, all the way down to youth programs. So all the kids and the parents know each other, because we all grew up, even if we went to different elementary schools and whatnot, we all grew up playing sports together and being on different teams together, and the parents get pretty close and all the kids get pretty close, and so it's a pretty tight-knit community. So all my friends, we all know each other's parents, so they all knew my dad, but they don't see him, and then he comes into class in a suit and starts talking to everybody in class about
something that you guys
what you do. Yeah, and all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, Christ, your dad's pretty smart."
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's a good memory.
Yeah.
Where did your mother work? Mm-hmm. What did she do for a living?
She's a teacher.
Cool.
She was a learning disabilities teacher, so she taught special education and kids with learning disabilities for the entire time I was growing up. She would tutor kids that just had sort of basic learning disabilities, things, whether it was dyslexia or things that just slower cognitive function or whatnot. And then she'd also work with kids who were really heavily cognitively challenged as well. And she was a teacher all growing up, so she worked in a handful of different schools and private schools, tutoring kids. She did tutoring on the side and educational seminars and programs, and
that's pretty cool. That's a noble profession.
Yeah, for sure.
What's your strongest image of your mother, or favorite memory?
It's funny, I don't have really intensive memories of my parents. I have really intensive memories of my relatives, like my aunts and uncles. Yeah. I was always closer to my aunts and uncles than I was to my parents. I've got another memory of my dad.
We'll share that one. I mean, because I tried to ask myself this same question, and what was weird is I could come up with several about my father.
And nothing about your mom.
She was always there. It's not like
and me too. I guess, but I'm certainly more like my dad, in many ways. And it wasn't my relationship with my mom was not like the mother-son, father-daughter intensive connection. I guess I remember being up. I remember being with my mom on the front steps of the house in Starksboro. The abiding image, one of the most ridiculous images I have of my dad. The day that I got my license, and I was young for my class, so I went through puberty after everybody. I got my license after everybody. The day that I got my license, my parents let me drive my friends four of my friends. We were all taking an SAT prep class together, and I picked them all up, and we went to class, and I dropped them all off, and I got home, and our driveway was at like a kind of a 30-degree angle, and it was a double garage doors under our living room, and I was driving my mom's car, which was a big black Dodge Caravan with like the fake wood paneling on the side, like extended cab Dodge Caravan.
Was it dope though? Was it the one? 'Cause some of those were cool.
No, it was super wanker style. It was low budge. And I pushed the garage door button and it didn't work, and so I got out and pressed in the code, and I wasn't really paying attention, and the opposite door opened, and I didn't even really think anything about it. And I got back in the car, and I went to pull in, and of course the garage door is closed, and so this is my first mistake, is not recognizing that the door in front of me is not open. My second mistake is that I shift from park into drive, but the emergency brake is still on, and it's a foot brake in the Dodge Caravans. It's not a lever brake.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is going on? Why am I not going anywhere? Oh, the e-brake's on. Did I put my foot on the brake? No. Did I shift it back into park? No. And my foot's on the gas. I literally pop the e-brake. I peel out 8 feet in front of my garage door. The skid marks were like 10 feet long, and smash through a 3-panel solid oak garage door. Shatter that thing in like 15 pieces. It's late at night. My parents are already in bed.
Yeah.
My dad comes downstairs in his tighty whities, and his glasses like cocked off on the side of his face, and looks at me, and it was as embarrassed and ashamed as I've ever been. But the visual of looking out the driver's side window in the garage at my dad in his tighty whities with his hair all up on the top of his head and his glasses kicked off will never leave me.
That's fantastic. Shit, everybody's got a couple of those, right? Where he's like, you have the opportunity to just fucking look up, and you know that the emergency brake's on, but you never, it never clicks.
First day with my license, man. I was so jazzed just to be driving people. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. None.
Oh man, that's a good one. Where did you attend high school?
My freshman year, I went to a private school called Rivers because my mom taught there, and I could get free tuition as a result, and my parents wanted me to try it. I had no real interest. It was an all-boys school. It was fine. I had a fun time there, a freshman year there. But they said, try it for a year. You can choose to go back after. You can choose whatever you want afterwards. And I chose to go back to my high school, Lincoln Sudbury. Lincoln Sudbury Regional High School is where I went to high school. And quite frankly, I mean, the educational systems in eastern Massachusetts, where I grew up, are some of the best public school systems in the country. And my high school in particular, I mean, we were taking like college level elective classes. My sophomore year in high school, I was taking Russian literature and history, intro to Asian cultures. I mean, think about the things that the coursework that you hear about in high school as a sophomore or junior in high school. That stuff's, you never hear stuff like that. And so it was a really cool, it was a great place to go to school, and all my friends were back there. I had plenty of friends at Rivers too, but all my longtime buddies were all at LS. So
so you said you played sports. What was your favorite sport?
My favorite sport to play?
Yes.
My favorite sport to play was probably the sport that I was the worst at, which was soccer.
Really?
My my second favorite was the one that I was the best at, and I was still crappy, but serviceable, was tennis.
Oh, okay.
So I played tennis all through high school. I definitely didn't do myself any favors by choosing the sports that I chose. I mean, I skied in the winter, I played tennis in the spring, and I played soccer in the fall. On my ski team, like, the top 4 guys on my high school team were like in the top 15 in the junior Olympic rankings in New England.
Really?
On my high school tennis team, the number 1 18-year-old, number 1 16-year-old, and number 1 14-year-old in New England were all on my team. So I was fighting an uphill battle, regardless. But
so you were probably good. Just maybe not in comparison to these Olympic athletes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's funny. Oh, were you involved in any school clubs?
I was involved in student government.
Okay.
I was one of the editors of the yearbook. I was on the debate team for a couple of years. So I did a lot of stuff.
Did you enjoy that?
Debate?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was always hard for me to get used to the format of debate. I always wanted to have more of like a discussion, not sort of like go as quickly as I could running point by point through a rebuttal. I mean, I understood it. I understood the format and why it was what it was.
Yeah. It just kind of goes against your default setting.
Yeah, it does. And even though my mind, even though I'm pretty quick cognitively and can think on my feet pretty well, that skill set doesn't necessarily translate to debate in the way that I wanted it to. So it was fine.
Did you have any teachers that you remember as being influential?
Oh, yeah, a couple.
Yeah.
Bambi Burke, who taught in an African American Studies class that I took in high school, was super cool. And Sandy Brown, who taught Intro to Asian Cultures, was awesome too. And also the Russian Literature and History course was 2 courses, and it was taught as 2 different classes, but they were sort of conjoined classes. The guy who taught the Russian literature side of it was Mr. Pachalski, and he looked like Marty Feldman. Like, he had these huge bug eyes, and he was crazy looking, and crazy in general. Both of the gentlemen that taught those courses were. Those 4. We had some really cool, very unique, very passionate teachers in my high school. I mean, it's amongst the reasons that all of those courses were offered. I mean, those are the kind of things that don't just come about naturally in the curriculum, right? You have to have a slew of educators who are so passionate about their coursework or the focus of their studies in college or their doctoral work, their thesis work, that they decide that they want to teach kids, high school age kids, about it. And there were a slew of those teachers all over the place. I had a chemistry teacher. He had crazy shock red hair, big portly guy. And we came into class one day, and the entree to class that day was we all sat down, and potassium creates a blue flame in water.
Yeah.
He took a golf ball sized chunk of potassium and threw it into a bucket of water and created this monster blue flame in the middle of the room. And I remember Alex Smith and Steve Williams going like, whoa. And I know they were thinking to themselves, what can we blow up with this?
Potassium.
Yeah, all sorts of crazy stuff, man. A lot of different personalities.
That's awesome. That's actually a topic I'm going to explore on
educators.
Is kind of Christine, my wife, is a term and a half away from her bachelor's degree.
Okay.
And she went in to be an educator. And now that she's going to graduate, in the time it took for her to start, when she decided to go back to school, she got a new job, and she's not going to be a teacher. And it's something that, to me, is a bit heartbreaking and kind of needs to be explored a little bit on the economics of that whole thing.
Oh, it's the legacy of this country in particular, right?
Right.
First responders, public servants, police, firemen, doctors, ish.
Yeah.
Police and firemen, and teachers, right? Three of the most important professions that you can go into, three of the most important professions as a means of maintenance and cultivation of your local community.
Yeah.
And they're three of the most underappreciated, underpaid, underfunded professions you can possibly go into. But that's what happens when you have a society that's based on, the next buck and the next thing and the next bit of capitalism. Of course, the flip side is that even if you don't have that democratic ideal, and you have something that isn't as money based, you probably have a much more totalitarian, authoritarian existence, in which case all of the joy and rapture and brilliance of education is yanked out of the system anyways, because you're only supposed to learn one thing, not learn how to seek knowledge.
Right. Yeah, there's got to be a middle ground.
I have to say, just on that point, and I won't digress here too far, but growing up Jewish, and I wasn't, my family was not particularly religious in the dogmatic sense. I had a bar mitzvah and we went to synagogue, on the high holidays and a handful of other times throughout the year and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But one of the things that I learned very early on was the value of seeking knowledge. And I learned it from my rabbis and my cantors. I always tell people, if you're in a horrible spot, if you need to seek if your faith is being questioned in your own mind and you need to seek advice from some member of the clergy, you need to talk to one of two people. You either talk to a Buddhist monk or you talk to a rabbi. Yeah. Because there is, even if they're in orthodoxy, even if they're involved in a sect that practices orthodoxy, rabbis, cantors, Jewish scholars and theologians, they, at their core, their purpose is to seek knowledge and to understand and to encourage you to do the same. And where another type of clergyman might try and dictate a response or an understanding or a mode of thought to you, a rabbi is always going to ask you to question yourself, to question the things around you, and seek, and always question those things, and always try and understand more, even if you don't put it into practice in your daily life. And I really took that, learning that, or at least sort of, even if I didn't learn it in the strictest, in the most codified sense, I learned it just by osmosis. Yeah. I could see that these were people, in talking to them, that wanted to learn more and wanted to understand things. And it wasn't about even necessarily wanting to. It's the understanding that learning more and knowledge is a good thing. Right. It's a means to a greater understanding of the world around you, and as a result, a more beautiful life. And the combination of my parents both being very well educated and my mom being an educator and being around people like that and having grown up in a Jewish faith where that is very much proffered to you on a constant basis really instilled in me the idea that it's okay to question and ask questions and want to know more about anybody or anything at any time.
That's one of the most important things to being a human.
It's why my life is what it is, man. I mean, I'm 45 years old, and I've lived 3 lifetimes worth of blessings in the time that I've walked on this earth. And I am abundantly conscious of and very appreciative of that fact.
Yeah. Did you have any teen idols? Like when you were in high school and stuff, was there any musicians, actors, anybody that you idolized?
Musicians and actors, no. Larry Bird, for sure.
Okay, of course.
I mean, that was a no-brainer. Yeah, Larry Bird and Ray Bork, and Jim Rice.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of sport. I mean, Boston's such a sports-heavy town, and I grew up a monster sports fan.
Oh, yeah.
And that is my idols in that sense were definitely in that vein. I also loved comedians. I loved Eddie Murphy.
Oh yeah.
Loved Dan
Cosby.
Aykroyd.
Yeah.
And Chevy Chase.
Yes.
And Bill Murray.
Oh yeah. All the Ghostbusters.
Yeah, man. Yeah, right. Totally.
So, what would people...
John Belushi.
Oh, yeah, John Belushi, Samurai. I always think of that first. That's always my first thing. It should be Animal House.
Samurai Delicatessen, man. The best. One of the best skits ever.
Dude was funny. I wonder what happened to his brother. I guess he got it all. He got all the funny. I don't find his brother funny at all. But, sorry.
If you're John Belushi's brother...
Yeah, no shit.
You gotta admit, man, that's a pretty tough rope to toe. I mean, you gotta. The fact that that Jim had the career that he did.
Oh, it's astounding.
Is astounding given. I mean, his brother was a god.
Yeah. Oh, no, for real. Yeah, that guy was everywhere. He was involved in way more stuff than I even had any idea. And watched a couple documentaries where Jim Belushi's just a part of everything that was funny or good at any time back then.
John Belushi's impression of oh my god,
Joe Cocker.
Joe Cocker.
Yeah.
Is
spot on.
It's one of the great memories of my childhood. I mean, we used to watch so much Saturday Night Live. I mean, all those movies. We just. I could recite to you line by line probably the screenplay almost verbatim from every one of those movies of that era.
Right. Well, and that's one thing I was talking to somebody about the other day. We'll get off this topic, but one movie that everybody loves is oh my god, I just lost it. The golf movie, Caddyshack. Everybody loves that movie, and I've never been a huge fan.
Really?
Except I love Bill Murray. I love Bill Murray and Chevy Chase in it. It's all the other stuff. But the one that holds up the most, that's from I believe they're both Lampoon movies, I believe, but it's Animal House.
Oh yeah.
Still to this day, it's just like it's amazing. So where did you attend college?
I went to Trinity College, which is in Hartford.
Okay.
Hartford, Connecticut. It is a very small liberal arts school, kind of one of the little Ivies with Williams, Wesleyan, Middlebury, Bowdoin, all those schools.
Okay. Did you live in a dorm?
I lived in a dorm, yes.
Yeah.
I did. I also lived in my fraternity house.
Oh, what fraternity were you part of?
For a year. I was in Pi Kappa Alpha, Pike.
Okay.
Which was interesting because everywhere else in the country, literally everywhere else in the country, super jock.
Oh, really?
Yeah, mostly like soccer and lacrosse and some football players. At Trinity, it was like the biggest. It was like the island of misfit toys. It was such a bunch of doofuses that all just happened to dig on the same stuff. There was a lot of rowers, but rowers are geeks too.
Well, they're all of them are. So, all jocks and everybody's geeking out about something different.
True this.
Who was your most memorable roommate?
My most memorable roommate in college?
Yeah.
Let me think about that.
Or you can open it up. It can be of all time.
Oh my God. I've lived with there is no such thing all time, man. I mean, I've lived with a cast of characters. You could build 18 sitcoms out of them. Definitely one of the most was one of my roommates freshman year. I lived in a quad, and so I had three other guys I lived with, and one of them was a guy named Carter McNabb. He was from Nashville, and that guy, he was like an all-state wrestler. He had never rowed before. He ended up taking up rowing and was a phenomenal rower. That guy, I mean, he had a lipper in 24 hours a day. He drank like a fish. I think the first night we were at school, we threw a party because Tad Walker's mom and dad gave us a mini fridge and gave it to us like stocked.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But Carter, that first night, drank like a fifth of Jack Daniels.
Yeah.
Literally the first night at school, I was like, wow, this guy's going to be fun to hang out with.
Was he? Or was it a big
Oh,
tease?
Carter was awesome. And incredibly bright.
Yeah.
Super bright dude, but a complete and utter redneck in every possible way, but super bright, really like naturally athletic, and could not give a flying F about one damn thing. And he'd just fly by the seat of his pants all the time. He was a riot.
Are you in touch with any of your old roommates?
I actually got in touch with one of them not too long ago. I have a handful of friends. I have so many long time, super intensive friendships.
Yeah.
I mean, like more than any one human being deserves.
That's awesome because that's something super rare. I mean, it just really is.
It is, and I never thought it was, and the more I've gone through life and the more people I talk to, I find out how rare it is. Yeah. And yet I have a slew of the. I mean, I always tell people, like, I have, figure you're probably lucky if you have one or two people in your life that you call really truly your best friends that you could tell anything to, and you talk about your worst problems with and everything else. I have like a dozen of those people in my life that I consider as close as kin. And so I have recently gotten back in touch with one of those freshman year roommates. I have a handful of friends from every sort of individual chronological segment of my life that I've maintained for long periods of time. I mean, amazingly, some of my closest friends are still all the peeps that I grew up with. There's a core group of about 35 or 40 of us, guys and women, that we've all known each other since we were 6 or 7 years old, and we're all still in relatively frequent communication. I don't know anyone
either
for whom that's the case, in my hometown or otherwise. And I used to think it was a Sudbury thing, but I've come to find out over the years that it's really actually
an Adam thing.
It's a my class thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not just me. We're all still in relatively close communication. If you expand that circle to like the 1.5 tier, light second tier, it's like 75 of us. My graduating class was 304, and there are a good 75 of us that are still in relatively, if infrequent, but nonetheless frequently infrequent communication, which is, I mean, it's unheard of, and we've known each other since we were in grade school.
That's a lot of history.
Hell yeah, man. I mean, these are peeps that I've known for, going on 40 years, and I'm 45 years old. That's ridiculous, and a lot of them.
It's super cool, though.
Yeah.
Because it's really rare. I mean, I've got one or two friends that I've had for going on over 20 years now, and you don't hear about that very often.
Right.
But
to be fair, my friendships are more important to me than my family.
Yeah.
Legitimately.
No,
I have a great relationship. I have two sisters, one biological sister and one stepsister, and we're super, super close. My real little sister in particular. But I make a point. I don't email people or Facebook shoot them. I call my friends.
See, that's
like
cool.
constantly.
Yeah.
And I want to, because if I want to keep in touch with you, if I want to talk to you, I want to hear your voice.
Right. Yeah. Because I'm bad about that sometimes because I'll text, and it's very impersonal. But
Anyway.
What subjects did you study
In
college? Yeah.
So my degree is in economics, but my intent was always to become an architect. Okay. I couldn't even tailor an interdisciplinary major in architecture at Trinity. There just wasn't enough coursework. So I majored in economics. I went abroad on Syracuse's architecture program when I was a junior, first semester of my junior year, and I lived in Florence for 7 months and did design there. So I was invited to go into a program called Guided Studies. It was an honors program at Trinity as a freshman. I was so far and away the stupidest person in that program. I mean, the course load was unreal, the amount of work that we had to do. We walked, the first day we all walked, I kid you not, we walked into the bookstore and we got all of our books for our first semester. Yeah. And we walked out and we're looking at other people and they've got this, stack, maybe 12, 18 inches high of books. And I've got a stack of books, my classmates and I, that's literally like 4 feet high. Yeah. And we all looked at each other like, what did we do? What have we done? So when I got to Trinity, you had to graduate with both a major and a minor. And this guided studies program, this honors program, gave you a minor in European civilizations. So I ended up with ultimately a BA in economics and a double minor in European civilizations and architecture. Okay.
Yeah. Was anything in the back of your mind thinking that you might go into the same kind of work that your dad did?
Absolutely not.
Really?
I couldn't. I had no. Where the one place where my dad and I are phenomenally divergent. And it's not to say that my dad doesn't get off on cool stuff and geeky stuff and doesn't have a little bit of a creative mind, but I had done fine art since I was 3 years old. Okay. In every form. Drawing, painting, sculpture, whatever. I was always, that was the hallmark of me when I was growing up was art. I was always a kid, hey Christ, can you draw something for me? If there was one real thing that I could rest my hat on, that I could hang my hat on, and that I was confident about, that gave me like a little bit of self-confidence, it was my artistic ability. Okay. Of course, I have lost all of that skill set over the years because I stopped training myself and my hands, and now all of that artistry I channel into food. Right. That being said, I always needed and wanted that creative outlet, and architecture was the latest iteration of that for me. I'd taken some drafting classes the last year and a half of high school, and it was the latest iteration of my art, and it was like the perfect marriage of the left-brained, super anal type A me and the hyper-creative designer me. And so there was no question in my mind, even when I ended up not getting into some of the schools I really wanted to that had undergraduate architecture programs and ended up going to Trinity instead, there was no question in my mind that I still wanted to be an architect. And in fact, when I moved out to Utah, that was what I started doing. I got a job working for an architecture firm here. Okay. And did so for the first year that I was out here. So it was always in some form the plan, and going to Italy and studying there only solidified that to like the nth degree.
Really? We'll talk about that a little bit more. Italy.
It was sick.
Where'd you study there?
So I went to Syracuse. Has one of the oldest campuses, oldest American college campuses anywhere in Italy, and it was in Florence. So I lived in Florence. Interestingly, my experience there is also what begat my culinary career. I had always been an eater. Since I was a baby, my parents could put anything in front of me. Yeah. And I would destroy things in both volume and palate. That was the other hallmark of, I was a midget, when I was a kid, and I could eat like someone 4 times my size. Adam Cephalo and I would go, and Dave Krugler, we would go to the Marlboro Twin Cinemas to go to the movies, and there was a Burger King across the street. And Cephalo and I would have cheeseburger eating races before the movie, and Krugler would sit there and like time us. It was absurd. So, and Cephalo was twice my size.
Yeah.
One of my best friends used to beat me up constantly, but we would eat each other into a blue coma because we could. So when I went to Italy, my eyes, because of my parents, because of traveling, because of the way I was raised, were already open. They opened like 8 times wider when I got there. And you're in this hub, this mecca of food and art and architecture. And I'm dropped into the middle of this culture that holds food in this position of primacy. And I'm there to study design and architecture. And I did. And so I'm walking around 24 hours a day with a sketchbook in my hand, drawing everything that I can see and analyzing it visually. And I'm also eating everything.
Oh, man.
And tasting everything. And the architecture students were the only students on the program who didn't live with host families, because you kept crazy hours in the design studios and they didn't want you blowing up the routine of a host family. So as an architecture student, we lived in our own apartment. We didn't live with a host family. I lived with 3 other guys. We ended up with this sick apartment, but you had to fend for yourself because you didn't have a host family cooking you meals or doing any of this other stuff. So between going out and going to the farmers markets and going to the local grocery store, Standa, and getting stuff and just taking it back to the apartment and messing around and making things, we started to figure it out. And I got the bug to learn how to cook. And I just wanted to eat more and more and see it. So the architecture was kind of jumping along, and I'm still following that. And the cooking is like lurking in the shadows behind the entire time.
Yeah.
And I still wanted to go into architecture and got out to Utah and worked for an architecture firm. Had one of the best work experiences of any kind that I've ever had. But I learned some things about the industry that kind of soured me on becoming an architect. And the cooking, when architecture fell out of the way, the cooking was like, try me.
So is that really where the idea came from, is what your time in Italy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Looking back and knowing that on your academic career, would you have changed anything?
No, not necessarily. You know, I was really, I wasn't super hype on going to Trinity at the outset. I have a little bit of a legacy there. I have a handful of family members, all of whom went to Trinity,
cool.
Just as it worked out.
Yeah.
My Uncle Peter, my dad's brother, 2 other cousins, and my Uncle Bobby also he's my cousin Bobby, but I call him my Uncle Bobby because he and my dad and Peter, and we're all close to the same age. In any event, they all went to Trinity. And so it was weird that I ended up there, because for me, I considered it a safety school.
Okay.
And yet, and all of the other schools that I was applying to, Duke, Cornell, Stanford, were all significantly bigger schools. And I ended up at this place where the education that you could get was obviously very good and very high quality. But it was a much smaller school.
Yeah.
And you could be a much bigger fish because it was a much smaller pond. And because the school was small, you could do a lot more. You just had the time and the literally the physical ability to make it happen because the campus was small.
Right.
And ultimately, I think it was a great move. It's why Salt Lake it's why I've been okay being in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Like, I was here for 3.5 years, and I went to San Francisco to go to culinary school and cook full time, and I felt like I needed to cut my chops in a real. When I decided to pursue cooking, I needed to cut my chops in a place that was at the forefront of the culinary world, which San Francisco is.
Very much
there are 3 great culinary cities in the world. San Francisco, New York, and Paris. Everybody else is playing second fiddle. There's just no two ways about it.
Right.
I needed to be in that city and know that I could hang with the big boys and learn around the big boys. But I wasn't super worried when I made the decision to come back to Salt Lake and open my first restaurant. I'm like, why are you going to Salt Lake, dude? There's no food there.
Right.
That's kind of why I want to come. I want to help this place become something more than it is. And that mentality, I think, was at least gestated during my time at Trinity.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. To be able to thrive in a place like that and then to come somewhere here where, I mean, luckily I know you. So you've turned me on to some good restaurants and some other good places that's never been bland for me since I've been here, because I met you right after I got here.
Yeah.
But I imagine someone like you who knows a lot more about it than I do and that kind of stuff, that it could be, especially, I think it's grown more since I've been here. I know it has on the food scene. So I imagine for a while it probably was pretty bland.
It was, and there's a certain extent, there's an upper tier that still doesn't exist here. It just simply does not exist.
Yeah.
That being said, there is a lot to be said for not being one of a million great chefs in a city that already has a million great chefs.
Right.
And struggling to make your mark, struggling to make a living, struggling to justify what it is you do and how many hours you work doing it. There's something to be said for being okay with having a balance in your life and being a moderately big deal in a place that doesn't have a lot of other big deals.
Right.
Generally speaking, in the grander scheme of things.
Right.
And that mentality for me, for being okay with that, was sown when I had to readjust my viewfinder when I ended up at a place educationally, college-wise, that I didn't really truly plan on going to, and thought after the fact, oh, really? Is this where I'm going to be? And I really ended up really digging it.
Yeah. Before you got into cooking and learning about it, what was your first job? Or was that your first job?
My first job?
Your first job.
Ever?
Ever.
Like the actual first paying job, like a W-2 earning job?
Yes.
Or my first, thing where I made money?
Well, you could decide that. I mean, if it was mowing
My
lawns.
first thing when I made money was snow blowing driveways in the winter.
Yeah.
And shoveling walkways.
Which I bet is a bitch.
My first job, and if you're gonna, have something that hints at a prescient understanding of what's going to be coming way down the pipe.
Yeah.
I bagged groceries at Sudbury Farms.
Oh, there you go.
Stands to reason. I mean,
how'd you like
everybody did. What do you do when you're a kid? You're 14 years old. What do you have the skill set to do? I can stick things in a bag. Great.
14-year-old
But I would line up that bag, man. I didn't jack it. I didn't throw everything in there in a pile. I worked it in there. I made sure the weight was right. I made sure the distribution was right. My bags are not breaking in your car or while you're carrying them. And I cared about all the stuff I was putting in there.
I'm sure you did. How did you like that, though, as a kid, bagging groceries?
It was cool because on my break, I could eat whatever I wanted.
Get out of here.
At the store.
They let you do that?
Yeah.
Oh, man. What was your worst job?
I don't know if it was the worst job physically or the worst job emotionally.
Oh man, that's because the latter can be worse than anything.
It can. I spent some time. I used to work down on Cape Cod when I was a kid in the summers when I was in high school, and I spent some time doing a little bit of construction, and in particular, I used to this guy that I worked for. We used to put in like walkways and stone walkways, and I would have to tamp down. Use it. You know what a tamper is?
Yeah, of course. Are you using the electric one or the
no,
one with your hand?
the wood handle with the 50-pound steel plate on the base of it, and I would have to tamp stone dust as the base of these stone walkways we'd put in.
Yeah.
Oh, that sucked. I mean, 80 degrees and humid on Cape Cod in the middle of the summer and greenheads all over the place. And you're just, I mean, yeah.
In addition to being paid money, how else has your career created value in your life?
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, the people that I know and the people that I meet and the people that know me, you know, just from a pride standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've gotten to do some things. I've gotten to travel. You know, I've gotten to cook in Italy. I've gotten to cook in Dubai. I've gotten to cook for Dick Ebersol and all the NBC executives at the Olympics in Torino, and gotten to do a James Beard dinner for the IOC delegates at Abravanel Hall to open the 2002 Olympics, and super fun stuff like that. Cooking in places.
Yeah.
And having experiences like that, meeting different politicians and actors and actresses and athletes and whatnot. Things like that. I honestly, I mean, the thing that always is remarkable to me that, I mean, I have enough confidence in my own food at this point that it's not remarkable in the strictest sense, but it is still remarkable to me, is that I have people that come up to me now. I mean, my first restaurant, and the only one really, you know, in my mind that really should have survived, if any of them should have survived, at the Globe. I mean, we closed the Globe in September of 2003. And I'll be walking in Harmon's, and I'll have somebody come up to me now. This is 14 years after we closed.
Yeah.
17 years after we opened. And somebody will be like, hey, are you used to run the Globe, huh? You're Adam? Yeah. Man, I had this dish there. I had this venison ravioli there that was, I'll never forget. I mean, 15 years after the fact, and somebody is talking to me specifically about a dish. Yeah. That they had, not just some random, general amorphous experience they had, which would be fine in and of itself, but it made that much of an impression on them that a single dish has stayed with them for a decade and a half.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That kind of stuff, man, is super cool to me.
That is cool. Thank you for listening to this episode of And Cory. Please tune in next time for part 2 of the interview with Chef Adam Kreisel, where we discuss family, friends, food, charity organizations he's involved with, and getting dirty in the desert and Burning Man.